This is a virtual tour of Philippi, Greece. The Apostle Paul came to Philippi on his second journey around 50 AD. And this building is a church dedicated to St. Lydia, one of the prominent figures in the story of Paul there in Philippi. It's a Greek Orthodox church that was built in the 1970s. And with all Greek Orthodox churches, you can tell to whom the church is dedicated based on the positioning of the icons either over the front door or on the panels leading into the Holy of Holies. Here you can see three arches, and I'm going to zoom into the middle arch. Always in the middle, you're going to have Jesus Christ as the central figure of the church. To the right, John the Baptist, and to the left, Mary, the mother of Jesus. And then the left arch, the prominent figure here is going to be who the church is dedicated to. So the central figure here in the purple is Lydia. To the left, you have Silas. To the right, Posidonia, one of the local saints around Philippi. This is the right arch, and the central figure is the Apostle Paul giving the blessing symbol with his hands. To the left, you have Timothy, and to the right, you have Luke. Walking into the building, you can tell it's made up of all marble. It's very beautiful. Lots of icons on the walls, and also in the back right, leading into the Holy of Holies. You have the baby baptismal in the center there, underneath the central dome that provides great acoustics. At the top of the walls and into the dome, all these mosaics that depict different scenes from the life of the Apostle Paul. The Greek word for Acts, or the book of Acts, is praxis. So in the picture, you can always tell which chapter and verse in praxis or in Acts this mosaic is found. This one is Acts 9 with Ananias baptizing Saul. And then we'll skip to Acts chapter 16 and the Macedonian call. The central figure there being the man from Macedonia, asking Paul and his companions to come over to Macedonia to help them. The people at the bottom of the mosaic with the halos are going to be Paul and Silas and Timothy and Luke. And they would have gotten into a boat and come across the northern Aegean Sea and stepped foot for the first time on European soil. They would have landed at Neapolis, which is New City, but also it's modern-day Kavala, and they would have gone 10 miles to the northwest to Philippi. Arriving in Philippi, they would have known right off that it was a Roman colony. Lots of retired military officials there from the Roman military. Behind Paul, you can see a statue of one of the Roman emperors. But everywhere you walked around Philippi, there would have been evidences that this was a Roman colony. Here you have an inscription of a fasces. The fasces dates back to the founding of Rome in 753 BC. The idea that, well, the word actually means bundle. So you have a bundle of rods. Instead of an individual rod, you have them bundled together because a bundle of rods is stronger than an individual rod. So this concept, we're stronger together. If it had the axe head, then the folks carrying that would have had the ability to perform capital punishment. These are rod bearers, or sometimes in the Bible it may be translated as magistrates or stratigo, but they would have carried the fasces, these bundles of rods, in front of the emperor or the proconsul or whoever the main figure was in the procession. But we have this idea in Washington as well, or in the United States, with Washington here leaning against a bundle of rods, leaning against a fasces. Also on our coins and our dollar bills, we have the Latin phrase, e pluribus unum, meaning out of many, one. We're stronger together. The Lincoln Memorial has two fasces as Lincoln has his hands on one on each side. Walking around Philippi, lots of inscriptions today. Some of them are going to be in Greek, but a lot of them are going to be in Latin. This one is talking about a legionnaire, one of the soldiers in one of the battles that he fought in. On the surface, on the ground of the marble, lots of inscriptions that look like game boards because the soldiers, as they're passing the time, they're trying to entertain themselves. And so this looks like a pie game board that if you had a pawn and you roll something similar to a dice, you advance your pawn. Maybe like Monopoly, you land on one section and you add something to your pawn, or you take something away if it's owned by someone else. So some people will say that this is what the Roman soldiers were doing with Jesus right before he was crucified, in that he was a human pawn. And as he was advancing from one section to the next, they were adding a crown of thorns or adding a robe. But that's one possibility. As Paul arrived into Philippi, he goes out to the place of prayer where he meets Lydia and these other folks. There was not a Jewish synagogue in Philippi, not enough Jewish men to have a synagogue. It takes 10 Jewish men to form a minyan, and with a minyan you can have a synagogue. But a lot of times places of prayer were out by rivers where it's peaceful, but also you have this idea of moving water, this idea of something that's constant there. And Paul speaks to Lydia, and her heart is opened up to the gospel, and he ends up baptizing Lydia and her whole household. And here's the waters just outside the church of Lydia today. That's James Nikolopoulos, our guide. As you walk around to the ancient site, you walk through the theater, a beautiful backdrop of the mountains there, open air theater, would seat several thousand people. And just below that is the agora, or the marketplace, the Roman Forum. And you have some ruins from 5th and 6th century basilicas, but in the foreground, the hub of the city there, the marketplace, the agora. And as Paul is walking through this, he comes across a girl who had the spirit of the python, or she was a Pythia. Some versions will say she had the ability to predict the future, or she was a fortune teller. And Paul ends up casting this spirit out of her. That gets him and his companions, at least him and Silas, in trouble. And Paul and Silas are beaten with rods, these rod bearers, beaten with rods, and then also thrown into prison in the inner cell. And the result of that, they sing praises and hymns to God. And there's an earthquake where the doors open up, the chains fall off, and here is a picture of what is listed as the jail there in Philippi. Might not be the actual spot, but here's Silas to the left, a good friend of mine, actually named Silas, and me being goofy. And then when the jailer rushes in, because at that time, if you did not keep your prisoners in place, if you lost a prisoner, it was a life for a life. And so he is getting ready to kill himself, but Paul realized this and says, wait, we're all here. Don't do it. And the jailer asks, what must I do to be saved? So he ends up washing the wounds of Paul and Silas. They talk about the gospel with him, and then Paul and his companions baptize the jailer and his family. And then right before they leave the city, they're escorted out of the prison, and they go and have one last visit with Lydia and her family. I hope you get to go to Philippi. It is a beautiful area, and the Church of St. Lydia is beautiful